Good morning. Today I want to talk about a verse that we actually looked at last week, 2 Corinthians 4, 16 and 18. This sermon could be seen maybe as a little bit of a sequel to last sermon, not part two. You could see it as a sequel. What was said last Sunday is going to be very helpful for what we're going to look at this morning. So turn your Bible to 2 Corinthians 4, 7. Or in your device, if you can turn in your device. I don't know how you do that, but click on your device. I got to apologize. My PowerPoint decided to not work this morning, so you're going to have to, I guess, listen very carefully at my quotes, but apologize for that. So let's look at 2 Corinthians 4, 7. We have this treasure in jars of clay to show that this all-surpassing power is from God and not from us. We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed. And notice that he doesn't say, we are hard pressed on every side, therefore I'm crushed. He says, but we're not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body. For we who are alive are always being given over to death for Jesus' sake, so that his life may also be revealed in our mortal body. So then death is at work in us, but life is at work in you. It is written, I believe, therefore I have spoken. Since we have the same spirit of faith, we also believe and therefore speak, because we know that the one who raised the Lord Jesus from the dead will also raise us with Jesus and present us with you to himself. All this is for your benefit, so that the grace that is reaching more and more people may cause thanksgiving to overflow to the glory of God. Therefore, do not lose heart. All this stuff's happening, therefore do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. Outwardly, stuff is happening outwardly, but inwardly we're being renewed. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. And I guess this morning I really want to focus on that. The last verse. So fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. So, great. Let's keep all those ideas in mind as we continue this morning, but first let's pray. God, I pray that we would open our hearts up to you, and that we would listen to what you have to say to us. You have something to say to all of us today. And so, God, I pray that we would be willing to listen to your voice and just hear what you have to say for us this morning as we look at your scripture, as we look at your word, as we look at a few other things this morning in your name. Amen. There was a group of writers a few years ago. They called themselves the New Atheists. I don't know if they're a big deal now, but they made a pretty big splash about 5 years ago. And these guys are really aggressive. So the most popular ones is Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, Sam Harris, Christopher Hitchens. Christopher Hitchens I thought was the most entertaining. He's even though I don't agree with him, I thought he was very entertaining. I watched lots of debates with him. He wrote a book called God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. That's a bold title. That's a fairly big claim. And I almost laughed when I saw it. I was like, you have a lot to prove, I suppose. But for those of you who aren't familiar with them, for me, just to give a summary of what they would say about religion, they'd say, religion was our first attempt at understanding the world. It was the best our ancestors could come up with. It did its job. But now we have science. Now we have physics. We have evolutionary biology. We have all these things which do a much better job at helping us understand the world. So let's let go of religion. We don't need its explanations anymore. So, is that true? Are they right? Does science threaten faith? Should science, if it's so successful, replace faith? Are these new atheists right? And I think it's an interesting question to ask, because science has an authority, right? So if somebody wants to say something, they'll say, it's been scientifically proven that, and then whatever they say, oh, we better listen, because it has to be true if somebody said it's scientifically proven. And so there's a certain kind of authority with science. And so we're living in an age where we have to think, okay, so does this threaten my faith? Does it make sense to have faith in the success of science in the same worldview? And so before we answer that question, I think it'd be helpful to look at what the new atheist worldview is. Do we know what worldviews are? A worldview is the way you look at the world. We have a lens that we look at the world, and we see everything through this lens. So, for example, if you were wearing a red lens, everything you would see is red, right? And if someone was to say, okay, that's a great blue chair over there, you'd say, no, it's not, it's red. And you say, no, it's a blue chair. And you say, no, I can see, it's red. And he's never going to change his opinion or his idea of what it is, because his lens, he's seeing through a red lens. And he's only going to change if he changes that lens. Everything he sees would be red. And so we all have a lens that we look through to look at how we interpret our world and how we make sense of our world. It's really important to understand that all of us have certain worldviews or perspectives. None of us has the full picture. Paul even says this in 1 Corinthians 13. He says, "For now we see only our reflection as in a mirror," or in another translation it says, "we only see through a glass dimly. But then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part, but one day I will know in full." When Jesus came on the scene, many people met him with a confused expression. Many people were thinking the Messiah would be a military leader. He would overthrow the Roman government. But when Jesus came, it was a big surprise for a lot of people. And I think God often works that way. What God does is often a huge surprise. We may think we know what God's going to do, but he does something that will surprise us. And I'm sure heaven's going to be like that too. We have an idea of what heaven's going to be like, but I'm sure once we get there, we will be very surprised in a good sense. I think it's going to be better than we could have ever predicted. But it's really important to treat yourself as a person with a perspective, with a lens, with a bias, to be aware of that, and to not lean on your own understanding. As Proverbs 3 says, "Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight." And I think that's actually very interesting. It says, lean not on your own understanding, but in all your ways submit to him, and then he will make your path straight. It's kind of like a fill in the blank. In all your ways submit to him. How can you do that? That's something you answer for yourself. That's something you have the joy of figuring out yourself. How do I submit to him in all of my ways? Abraham, I always think of Abraham when I think of faith, and when I think of trusting on your own understanding. God told Abraham to go to a land that he will show him. And Abraham says, "Okay, where's that?" And he says, "Well, I'll show you." He's like, "Okay, that's kind of awkward. So am I just supposed to start walking? Or, what am I supposed to do?" And he says, "Yeah, just start walking." And so he gets all this stuff ready, and he tells his parents, and their parents say, "Well, you're 30 years old. Finally, you're leaving the house." Because he actually was 30 at this point. And they would say, like any other parent would, "So where are you going to go?" "I don't know. I'm just going to start walking." I don't know how they felt about that. But Abraham walked by faith. He didn't understand everything, and he didn't need to understand everything. He just needed to be obedient to God. And it seems like when God calls people, it always has that flavor. He doesn't tell you everything. He just tells you what you need to know. Maybe that's frustrating for you. It's nice when we know what's going on, right? But it looks like God tells you what you need to know, and then you just put your trust, your faith in him. All that to say, we need to humble ourselves and recognize that we have a perspective, a lens, a worldview, a bias. All of us do, including the new atheists, including everyone. Everyone has a worldview. Everyone has a perspective. John Hott wrote a book called God and the New Atheists, a critical response to Dawkins, Harris, and Hitchens. Wonderful book. I highly recommend it if you're interested in this topic. And he starts off the book describing what he thinks the new atheist worldview is, the lens that they're looking through. And this is how he describes it. The belief system that the new atheists subscribe to is known as scientific naturalism. Its central dogma is that only nature, including humans and our creation, is real, that God does not exist, and that science alone can give us complete and reliable knowledge. So this is the lens they're looking through. This is how they make sense of everything else. And the key word here is complete. I assume that we all agree that science does give us reliable knowledge in our world. None of us would deny that. But it's another thing entirely to say that it gives us complete knowledge, that it's the only trustworthy thing. In the middle of John Hott's book, he gives a little bit of a response to this worldview. And he says this: scientific naturalists believe, since they cannot prove, that science is the privileged way to encounter the real world, that only scientifically available evidence counts, and that only scientific understanding and knowledge can be trusted. But since the only world that science is methodologically able to understand is an objective, impersonal set of quantifiable properties, this is the only world the strict scientific naturalist knows as well. And I wish I had a PowerPoint, because that's a kind of a wordy quote. But what he's basically saying is that the science, their perspective only allows an objective world. And it's a narrow sort of view of the world. And he goes on, if everything real or worth talking about is an object accessible to scientific method, then the world of subjects and persons begins to slip out of sight and off the map of reality altogether. If a hammer is your only tool, then everything looks like a nail. If objectification is your only cognitive instrument, then everything looks like an object. And so what John's basically saying is that there's a little bit of an imbalance in this worldview. You're seeing everything as one color. You're seeing every problem as a scientific problem. And, science can't solve all your problems, right? It can't solve your relationship problems you have with your boyfriend or girlfriend. Don't consult science for that one. It's not going to work. And so what would be a better, more balanced view? John Polkinghorne was a quantum physicist. I think he did this in the 60s, maybe a little bit longer. But at some point he became an Anglican priest, which makes him pretty unique. Quantum physicist turned Anglican priest. I don't know how many of those there are. But someone asked him, how do you balance faith and science? And this was his response. He said, I think science is very powerful and successful because it has limited its ambition. Essentially, it asks how things happen, what are the processes of the world. It brackets out asking the question of why things happen, or whether there is a meaning and purpose of what's going on. Similarly, it treats reality as an object, something you can kick around, pull apart, find out what it's made of. That's the experimental method, which is science's great secret weapon. But there are a whole swathe of encounters of reality where we meet it not as an it, but a thou, where testing has to give way to trusting. Science is successful, but it couldn't possibly be the whole story because it has to limit itself too greatly. I think this is a great position to adopt. It's a great perspective to have. In this, in the year 2013, we need to sort of figure out how do we fit science into our worldview, how do we fit faith into our worldview, and I believe that they do not have to be in conflict. I don't think you need to choose one or the other. John Hott gives an analogy and how he balances science and faith, and he calls it a layered explanation. He says, and this is his example, suppose a fire is burning in your backyard, and your neighbor comes over and asks you, explain to me why this fire is burning. Well, one answer you could give is the carbon in the wood is turning into carbon dioxide and other gases, it's giving off heat and so forth. Or you could also say it's burning because I want to roast some hot dogs. Or you could say, in a more ultimate sense, it's because I want to have a picnic. And the point that's being made is, it's not as if you have to choose one or the other, right? There isn't conflict between those explanations. They're all true. And this is his explanation of layered, or his example of layered explanation. You do not need to place faith and science in unnecessary conflict. Faith and science do not need to be a threat to each other, as the new atheists insist that they are. You do not need to choose one or the other. And so I say all of this to say that when Paul says, set your eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, it's not some sort of close your eyes and become unreasonable, become unscientific. Close your eyes. Don't trust your eyes. Your eyes have a purpose. God gave them to you. Use them. But what is he really saying? He's saying that Your eyes don't tell the whole story. Your eyes don't see everything. They can tell you a few things. They're good at what they do, but they don't tell you everything. And the reason why I've used science as an example is because the scientific method is all about observation. It's all about your eyes. And it's good at what it does, but it doesn't tell you everything. If we go back to 2 Corinthians 4:16, let's read it again. Therefore we do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, and what is unseen is eternal. We can get caught up in this world around us that's changing. He says this world that is temporary, this world that's constantly in flux, that's constantly on highs and lows. Your life is always changing, but there are other things that are constant, that are unchanging, and that's God. And I think if we get caught up in the waves of life and we don't have a hold of God, we don't have a sense of the eternal, we can get just rolled away in the waves. And we can get very anxious, very nervous, very maybe depressed over what's going on around us. And it's because we've lost hold of the eternal, of the unseen. We are to set our eyes on God, on His kingdom, on what's eternal. And sometimes it's a hard thing to do. Why? We live in a noisy world, I think all of us would agree. We have weekly schedules, we have deadlines, we have lists of things to do, things to get caught up on. When I was in Calgary, I was talking to somebody that was new to the city, and he's just talking about how it's a weird trying to adjust to the new city. He's like, yeah, I hurry to work, I hurry to get to lunch, I hurry back to work, I hurry home. Once I get home, I have to hurry up and have fun before it gets too late. And I'm hurrying all the time, and I thought it was hilarious, actually. And I was like, yeah, it's sometimes things can get pretty busy. And we can get busy, can't we, with this place, with this world. So much so that we sort of lose sight of the eternal, lose sight of heaven. And we may still be spending time in the Word and in prayer daily, but it's possible to do those things and not actually do them. You know what I mean? Like you can be reading your Bible, praying, doing all the things you're supposed to be doing, but your mind could be somewhere else. And it's not as if you mean for it to be that way, but life is just so demanding sometimes, and you have to think about this and that and balance this or that. And it can be noisy. Life can be. But if we are going to set our eyes on the unseen, set our eyes on God, look for His will in our lives and the opportunities He has for us every day, we have to pay attention. We have to pay attention to what God is saying to us. Because God is always speaking to us. And although it may be unseen, maybe we can't see God, we have to recognize that our eyes don't see everything. We make the mistake that our perspective sees it all, and it doesn't. This is why it makes it necessary. This is why Paul necessarily says we have to set our eyes on what is unseen. There's a book by Frederick Buechner. I don't know if anybody has ever read anything by him. Very good writer. He wrote a book called Alphabet of Grace. And the book is basically about he's going through one day of his life. There's 3 chapters, morning. I think it's morning, midday, and then night. And he's basically talking about all the ways that God is talking to him throughout that one day. And for him, God talks to him through events. Events happen in his life. And so what he means by the alphabet of grace is that each event is like a letter or a word. And they make, God is speaking to him through those events. And it's the alphabet, the language of grace. It's a really good book. And his phrase that he always uses, he says, pay attention. If you can't hear God, make your heart ready to hear Him. Don't fold your arms and say, God, speak to me. Come on, I haven't heard you. Just say something really loud so I can hear you. Or meet me on my terms, basically, sometimes we say to God. And what we need to do is that we need to meet God on His terms. We need to pay attention to what He is saying. If you pray at the beginning of your day, God, help me see the work that you're doing. Many times we want God to get on board with our ideas, right? With our ministry ideas or whatever. As if God isn't doing anything. We think, oh, come on, God, I'm trying to get going on this thing. Can you please help me out? And meanwhile, God is actually doing a lot of stuff underneath us, right in front of us. And we are not paying attention to what he's doing. I think if you want to be used by God, first ask God, what are you doing? Because he is doing something. And how can I be a part of that? But God speaks to all of us. God is speaking to all of us in many different ways. And I really believe that God speaks to us in unique ways. The three wise men, when they came to meet Jesus, when he was born, how did they get there? They followed a star. Isn't that an interesting way for God to talk to somebody? That wouldn't work for me because I don't really care about the stars, really. I don't look at the stars. So that wouldn't be an effective way for God to talk to me. But it was for them. That was their career. That's what they spent their lives doing. And who knows what kind of culture they came from or what kind of background, what kind of life they were leading. Who knows which gods they were serving or whether they believed in a God or not. We don't know any of that. All we do know is that they were searching for something. They were searching for God. They were, whatever God is, whatever name he has, I am searching for that. And God answered them. I think sometimes we underestimate God and how he can talk to people. If you're looking for God, you will find him. Doesn't it say that in the Bible? Seek and you shall find. I think God means it when he says that. Like if you are seeking him, you will find him. Just like the wise men, they were seeking God and they ended up following a star to Jesus. I think that's like one of the greatest examples of God speaking to people. And it's unique. And so I'm wondering, how does God speak to you? Maybe you're trying to, you think, when I spend my daily time in prayer and reading, that's the only time God can speak to me. He definitely does speak to you in those times, but I think we need to open our eyes a little bit and realize that God can speak to us in many different ways, as long as we're open to it. And you might ask, well, how do I know? There isn't really a way I can tell you how you'll know. I'll just say that you will know. like when God speaks to you, he doesn't, like you will know if you are looking for it. And it will be deep. It will be to the point. It will be to your heart. Another phrase that Frederick Buechner says is listen to your life. Listen to what's happening in your life. Listen to what God may be doing underneath your nose. God is speaking to you probably more than one way, so let's pay attention. Let's listen to our lives. Worship team, you can come up. One of his quotes that he said in his, Buechner said in his book, Secrets in the Dark, says, our eyes are just our eyes and not all that we have for seeing. Maybe not even the best we have for seeing. Facts are all the eyes can see, but they cannot see truth. It's not with the eyes of the head that we see truth, but it's with the eyes of the heart. To see Jesus with the heart is to know in the long run that his life is the only life worth living. And I love that phrase. It's with the eyes of your heart that you see truth. And this is kind of where we get back to what was spoken about last Sunday. Don't lose heart. I think that's critical. The posture of your heart, the position of your heart really determines what you see, determines what you see around you. I think of Thomas, doubting Thomas. He's unfortunately named for forever, it seems. I'm sure he did a lot more than doubt, but we call him Doubting Thomas. And it was after Jesus had rose from the grave, and a few people have seen him. Everybody's talking about it. The disciples have gathered, and they're talking about this. And then Thomas says, "Well, I'm not going to believe until I see for myself." And when I read this story, I often had read it like this is this cold, rational person that he had no heart. He just had a a mind, and he was very cold, and he wouldn't believe. But I don't know, like, you think about the time in his life. He had been following Jesus, he had committed his life to him, and he had just died. Like, how would you feel? I would be a crisis in my life. Who knows what kind of emotions were rolling inside of him, underneath. And maybe he was saying, don't play with my emotions. like this, don't go there. I'm not going to believe until I see for myself. Who knows what was going on in his mind? We don't know. But nevertheless, Jesus said, you see because you believe because you've seen. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet still believe. And like if your heart is in pain and grief and despair, that still isn't an excuse to not trust in God. It wasn't an excuse for Thomas. Jesus said, blessed are those who have not seen and yet still believe. And so, I don't know how many of us like to admit, those of us who have committed our lives to God and follow Him, like to admit it when we feel that God is distant or He's absent. It's kind of an awkward thing, right? How is that? Have I done something wrong? I thought I was a child of God. How come God is distant? And that's not an easy question to answer. You look at the Bible, there's all kinds of different reasons. David felt that God was distant. Of course, Job felt that God was distant and they hadn't done anything wrong. And so you could ask, oh, why? But I think the more important thing to do is whether I feel God is near or not, I'm going to trust in Him. Whether I can see God or not, I'm going to trust in Him. And I think that's the point that Paul is really trying to hit home. Whatever your eyes see, what is your heart like? Where is your heart? What is the situation of your heart? Where is the posture of your heart? And how can we commit ourselves to God? How can we submit ourselves to Him, regardless of what we see? And so, Carrie, why don't you lead us in the song as we close?